Two condemned men stood in the power of a king whose lover had been killed years before. According to the chronicler Fernão Lopes, the king watched as one man's heart was removed through his chest and the other's through his back. The king was Pedro I of Portugal, but the famous image conceals a crucial distinction. Pedro ordered the punishment and in Lopes's account was present for it. The surviving evidence does not establish that he tore out the hearts himself. Even without that embellishment, the story is extraordinary. It began as a forbidden royal relationship. It became a struggle over succession, foreign influence, and the future of Portugal. It led to political murder, rebellion between a king and his heir, an international exchange of fugitives, and a punishment so notorious that Pedro would be remembered as both the just and the cruel. Then the story passed into legend, where a murdered woman became Portugal's dead queen. The woman at the center of it was Inês de Castro. Born sometime in the 1320s, she belonged to the Castro family, a powerful noble house with deep connections in Galicia and Castile. That background would eventually make her far more dangerous to the Portuguese court than an ordinary royal mistress. In 1340, Pedro, heir to King Afonso IV of Portugal, married Constança Manuel of Castile. This was a political marriage, part of the network of alliances binding and dividing the kingdoms of medieval Iberia. Constança did not arrive in Portugal alone. Her household crossed the border with her, carrying attendants, loyalties, family connections, and political influence. Among the women who came with her was Inês de Castro, conventionally described as one of her ladies-in-waiting. Pedro and Inês began a relationship while Constança was still alive. The exact beginning is unknown. No reliable account preserves their first meeting, their private words, or how their relationship developed. What can be established is that it continued and eventually became impossible for the Portuguese crown to dismiss as a temporary affair. Constança died in 1345. Her death removed one obstacle, but it did not make Inês a politically acceptable partner for the heir. King Afonso IV wanted Pedro to make another useful royal marriage. Such a union could secure an alliance, reinforce the succession, and place the future of the dynasty within a recognized legal structure. Pedro did not promptly follow that path. Instead, his relationship with Inês continued openly enough to alarm his father and the royal council. Pedro and Inês had several children, usually identified as Afonso, Juan, Dinis, and Beatriz. Their children became part of a much larger dynastic question. They were children of the future king of Portugal, but their mother belonged to a powerful Galician Castilian family. Inés's brothers also gained influence around Pedro. That combination created the possibility of a rival political network forming around the heir. The danger was not that a proven conspiracy had already been uncovered. Inês cannot be securely described as a spy, and there is no firm basis for claiming that she was secretly directing a plan to seize the Portuguese crown. The threat lay in what might happen. If Pedro's sons by Inês were accepted as legitimate, or if their mother's family used its influence on their behalf, they could become alternatives to Fernando, Pedro's son by Constança. Powerful Castilian nobles might then become involved in Portugal's succession. Rival factions could gather around different royal children, and a family dispute could become a civil war. For Afonso IV and his counselors, love, marriage, legitimacy, and national security could not be separated. The king's heir was not free to treat his household as a private world. Every intimate relationship had political consequences, and every royal child could become the center of a future claim. Inês was therefore neither merely a helpless figure in a romance, nor a proven architect of a succession plot. She was politically consequential because of her family, her access to Pedro, and the children they had together. By early 1355, the king and his advisors had moved toward a drastic solution. A royal council, traditionally connected with Montemoro Velho, considered the problem. 3 councillors became closely associated with what followed: Pêro Coelho, Álvaro Gonçalves, and Diogo Lopes Pacheco. They would later become the targets of Pedro's revenge. But responsibility for the decision did not rest with them alone. They were councillors serving Afonso IV, and Inês's death depended upon the reigning king's authorization. Afonso approved the killing. Inês was put to death at or near the royal residence associated with Santa Clara in Coimbra. The date is traditionally given as the 7th of January, 1355, although that precise date is not beyond dispute. The exact method, the people present, and the words spoken cannot be recovered with confidence. Later, storytellers would fill those silences with dramatic details. They imagined final pleas, grieving children, and a prince absent on a hunt. Those images became powerful, but they do not belong to the securely established core of the event. What is clear is stark enough. A reigning king authorized the death of the woman who was the partner of his son and heir, believing that her removal would protect the dynasty. Instead, it pushed the kingdom toward open conflict. Pedro responded with armed rebellion against his father. The killing had not eliminated the political crisis surrounding Inês. It had transformed that crisis into a confrontation between Portugal's reigning king and the man expected to succeed him. The revolt continued until a settlement was reached. The surviving account does not allow a detailed reconstruction of Pedro's private motives or every episode in the conflict. Yet the scale of his response is unmistakable. Inês's death did not remain a private bereavement. It divided royal authority itself. Afonso IV survived the rebellion, but only for 2 more years. He died on the 28th of May, 1357. Pedro was now king. His accession changed everything. As heir, Pedro had been able to rebel, but his father still held the crown. As Pedro III of Portugal, he possessed royal courts, political authority, and the power to negotiate with other monarchs. Coelho, Gonçalves, and Pacheco were no longer protected by the king who had authorized the killing. They had become enemies of the new ruler. Yet Pedro did not capture all 3 immediately. His revenge required time, diplomacy, and the cooperation of another kingdom. Across the border ruled another king, Pedro I of Castile. The Portuguese and Castilian kings reached an agreement involving the exchange of political fugitives. This was not Pedro of Portugal personally chasing his enemies across Iberia. It was a negotiated act between sovereigns. Through that agreement, Pêro Coelho and Álvaro Gonçalves were delivered into Portuguese custody. Diogo Lopes Pacheco escaped Pedro's reach. The revenge would be terrible, but it would not be complete. What happened to Coelho and Gonçalves is known chiefly through Fernão Lopes, Portugal's great 15th-century royal chronicler. Lopes wrote roughly 8 decades after Inês's death. He was not an eyewitness, and no surviving contemporary execution record confirms every detail of his description. But his account cannot simply be dismissed as a modern invention. It is the principal narrative through which Pedro's reign and vengeance entered Portuguese historical memory. Lopes says the 2 captives were interrogated and executed under Pedro's authority. He presents the king as present and closely involved in their punishment. Then comes the detail that has overshadowed almost everything else. One man's heart was removed through his chest and the other's through his back. The chronicler's wording supports the claim that Pedro had their hearts removed. It does not prove that the king performed the mutilations with his own hands. That difference matters. The historical Pedro did not need to become the executioner personally. He had become king, and royal power allowed him to turn vengeance into public punishment. The men had been delivered through international diplomacy. They were held within his jurisdiction. Their deaths announced that those involved in Inés's killing could be brought across borders and placed under the authority of the man who had once been powerless to save her. Yet the executions were politically complicated. Coelho and Gonçalves had been connected to the killing, but the original decision belonged to Afonso IV's government. Pedro could punish his father's counselors. He could not put the dead king on trial. The bodies of those two men therefore carried a much larger burden of responsibility. Their executions avenged Inés, removed enemies of the new ruler, and displayed Pedro's command over royal justice. Personal vengeance and state power had become inseparable. Fernão Lopes helped shape the image of Pedro that endured. In his writing, the king could be merciless in punishment while also appearing committed to justice. That apparent contradiction gave Pedro two reputations: the just and the cruel. To a modern audience, the heart removals may appear to overwhelm every possible claim of justice. But Lopes was not writing a simple accusation against a monstrous king. He presented a ruler whose severity could be understood as part of his determination to punish wrongdoing and impose royal authority. That does not make the punishment less brutal. It reveals how brutality could be incorporated into an image of forceful medieval kingship. Lopes was also writing under the Aviz dynasty, founded by João I, another son of Pedro, born outside marriage. Questions of legitimacy, royal descent, and the political value of Pedro's children were therefore not remote subjects. They were part of the dynastic world in which the chronicler worked. His narrative preserved essential traditions, but it also shaped them into a moral and political portrait. The execution account tells us what was remembered about Pedro in the 15th century, not simply what an observer recorded at the moment. Pedro's effort to transform Inés's position did not end with the deaths of Coelho and Gonçalves. In 1360, he made a public declaration with enormous consequences. The king announced that he and Inés had secretly contracted a valid marriage years before her death. The declaration itself is historical. The underlying marriage remains unverified. Pedro claimed that the ceremony had been private, which made independent confirmation difficult. Accepting his statement would mean that Inés had not merely been his mistress, she had been his lawful wife, and their children could be viewed as legitimate royal offspring. This was more than a tribute to a dead woman. It reached directly into the succession. Fernando, Pedro's son by Constança, already occupied the recognized position of heir. But if Pedro's sons by Inés were legitimate, their standing became far more serious. The same children who had caused anxiety during Afonso IV's reign could now claim a lawful place within the royal family. Pedro's declaration may have reflected a genuine marriage, a political strategy, a posthumous act of honor, or some combination of these. The surviving evidence cannot settle the question. What matters is what the statement attempted to do. Inés had been killed as a dangerous partner whose status remained uncertain. 5 years later, the king publicly presented her as his wife. Death had not removed her from Portuguese politics. Pedro then gave that claim a permanent physical form. Inés's remains were transferred to the royal monastery of Alcobaça, where he commissioned an exceptional tomb for her. He also ordered a tomb for himself. Their sculpted effigies were arranged to face each other. The monuments placed Inés within a royal and devotional setting and joined her memory to Pedro's in stone. Unlike the exact details of the executions, these tombs survive. They are material evidence of the extraordinary status Pedro gave Inés after her death. They do not prove that the secret marriage took place. They do not prove that she was universally accepted as queen, but they show that Pedro intended her to be commemorated with a magnificence far beyond that of a forgotten royal mistress. The tombs transformed memory into architecture. Inês had once entered Portugal as part of another woman's household. Afonso IV's government later treated her as the center of a potential dynastic threat and authorized her death. Pedro then elevated her remains, connected her to his own burial, and asserted that she had been his lawful wife. The political crisis had become a memorial program. Pedro ruled Portugal for 10 years. He died on the 18th of January 1367 and was buried at Alcobaça. His son Fernando, the child of Constança, succeeded him. Fernando's accession is an important limit on what Pedro's marriage declaration achieved. Whatever status the king intended for Inês and her children, his claim did not immediately replace the established succession with one of her sons. But the political outcome was not the end of the story. Over the following centuries, chroniclers, poets, playwrights, painters, and popular storytellers expanded the events into one of Europe's great tragic legends. Inês became the dead queen, a woman granted in memory the royal status denied to her during life. The most famous addition was the story that Pedro had her body exhumed, placed on a throne, crowned, and presented to the Portuguese nobility. The nobles, according to the tale, were forced to approach the dead queen and kiss her hand. It is an unforgettable image. It is also a later legend, not a securely documented event from Pedro's court. The historical transfer of Inês's remains to Alcobaça provided fertile ground for such a story. Pedro had declared her his wife. He had given her a royal tomb. Later generations took those established actions and created a scene in which the entire kingdom was compelled to recognize her after death. The legend expressed a truth about her posthumous importance without reliably describing an actual ceremony. Other details grew in the same way. Artists and writers supplied speeches where the historical record was silent. They placed the children at their mother's death, gave Inês final words, and turned Pedro's punishment into the act of a man physically reaching into the bodies of his enemies. Each addition made the story more immediate. Each also blurred the line between event, chronicle, and imagination. The verified history needs none of them to remain remarkable. Afonso IV's government faced a real dynastic problem. Inês's family connections, her brother's influence, and her children by the heir created fears of foreign intervention and a divided succession. Those fears did not prove that she was conspiring against Portugal, but they explain why the court treated the relationship as a matter of state. The decision to kill her was intended to remove that danger. Instead, it provoked rebellion and deepened the crisis. When Pedro became king, he did not respond as a wandering lover seeking private revenge. He used monarchy itself. He negotiated with Castile, obtained 2 political fugitives, and subjected them to a punishment that Fernão Lopes would preserve in horrifying detail. Then Pedro fought a second battle over Inês's identity. By declaring that she had been his wife and placing her at Alcobaça, he turned a murdered noblewoman into a figure of royal memory. Politics made Inês vulnerable. Pedro's kingship made the revenge possible. His memorials made her impossible to erase. That is why Pedro and Inês endured in memory long after the succession crisis that led to Inês's death had passed. Their story could be told as romance, warning, political tragedy, or an example of terrifying royal justice. Every generation could choose a different Pedro: the grieving partner, the calculating king, the relentless judge, or the cruel avenger. The truth stands between those images. Pedro was not proven to have torn out the hearts with his own hands, but according to Portugal's most important later medieval account, he had 2 men associated with Inês's death executed and their hearts removed. He pursued them through royal diplomacy, punished them through royal power, and placed the woman with whose death they were associated at the center of a royal memorial. The legend crowned a corpse. History shows something more complex. A dead woman elevated through declaration, punishment, and stone until her memory became stronger than the political decision meant to destroy her. Inês never ruled Portugal, yet beside Pedro at Alcobaça and within the story Portugal told about itself, the murdered lover became the queen that death could not silence.